Everybody pick up a packet? Yeah? What I wanted to do, my name is Julie Page. I co-coordinate the California Preservation Program, which is a project of the California State Library. Susan Hanks is our grant monitor for the California State Library. And the idea here is you walk in and there's a flood, or you walk in and materials you've been working on are now on the floor, or the box is wet on a shelf, that kind of thing. What can you do? What would be some steps to take? So I put together some resources for you. I want to show you first the last one is a listing of web resources on one side, and then some books and an app on the second page. So the first one is the Western States and Territories Preservation Assistance Service, and I want to point that out to you. I co-coordinate that as well as the California Preservation Program, but it goes to all the Western and Pacific states and territories. The reason is, if you'll notice in bold, a little ways down, it has that handout templates are available online, and it gives you a URL there. And so these documents are available there that you can download. And a lot of other documents that go along with our disaster plan writing workshops. But the thing for us is that about the only thing we can do if something gets wet is either to buy time by freezing it, because we can put things in a freezer right away, and then we can deal with them later, take little bits of them out at a time and air dry them, or we can send them to a company and have them vacuum freeze dried, which is a process that takes the frozen ice crystals straight from frozen ice crystals, vaporizes them to vapor, and things never go back through the water state again. And so I'll show you a couple of different things where that's especially helpful, because otherwise they can stick together. But all we can really do is air dry. It takes no sophisticated equipment. It just takes a lot of people and a lot of space. It's labor intensive and it's space intensive. So that's why we focus a lot of our emergency response on water damage. Could come from fire hoses, can come from sprinkler systems, can come from flooding, any of a number of water sources or rising water from below. So that's the one that basically we organize our emergency plans around, and our training and knowing kind of the first couple of steps to take. So you have a handout called Salvage at a Glance. I'm pretty fond of this because it gives you, especially where you have artwork and you have microfiche and film and photographs and possibly even add some things to your collection or things that are on loan to you that you may not normally know what to do with. This is a great resource because it covers many different kinds of materials, right to specimens and different kinds of artwork, LPs. What do you do with a watercolor versus an oil painting? And it gives you the first couple of steps. Again, remember, I'm trying to just get it to the point where you can take the first couple of steps to know what to do without causing additional harm. The harm's already been done. And if you notice, there are these snowflakes going down the left-hand side. That means that kind of material can be frozen. Remember what I said? Freezing buys time. It allows you to make good decisions. You can pack up books into boxes, you can pack up photographs, you can take file cabinet drawers, you can take flat file drawers, and you can simply put them right into freezer storage, commercial freezer storage in those cases. But that will stop the damage right at that point. So this gives you a handy, quick reference. And across the top, it just tells you kind of vaguely what kind of priority. Is it something you need to deal with in the first 24 to 48 hours, or can you take longer? And it helps you kind of focus your efforts. Any handling precautions, for example, with books on that first, it says do not open or close. Do not remove covers. I mean, all of that handling of the books causes more damage to the bindings. Packing methods for books. It tells you to pack them spine down. So you put them in a box, you put them in spine down, and you'd pack them straight across. I didn't bring a box today because we don't really have enough books to pack, but I'm going to have you practice some air drying with them. You put them down. If you have books that are really important, leather covers, any kind of decoration on them, anything like that, you can use something like wax paper or freezer wrap, and you can put that around the cover. And it just separates them so the books don't touch each other. For example, these 3 books, I got wet yesterday. They've been wet now for 24 hours. I had them in water for about maybe 2 hours. And what's interesting and what I wanted to show you is this book has almost dried. There was a fair amount of water in it, but because of its kind of paper, it simply is nicely coming apart. This book is clay-coated paper, which is that glossy paper on illustrations. This is a children's book. It has a lot of illustrations in it. These could be art books. They could be illustrations scattered throughout a book on baskets. It might have color illustrations on baskets and then regular. This type of paper is much harder to deal with, and it tends to kind of clump together. Now, I can try to start pulling these apart, but it's pretty, you really don't want to do this. And I don't know if you can hear it. Can you hear that kind of crunching? It has started to dry, and the clay coating on those pages has started to fuse together. I leave this like this, besides the fact it might get a little moldy, it will freeze into just a block. Okay, just a block of paper. This is the 3rd book. I didn't expect this to happen. It's an issue of Serials Librarian, and it hasn't dried at all. I mean, I can really not even hardly open this to air dry it. I mean, I can start, but I'm likely to start to do some damage. So the point here is lots of different kinds of paper will react to water in different ways. And all of these got water from below. And that's what's in your buckets as well. These two buckets of books, this is an example of water from below. And what I did, and about 2 hours before lunch, I filled these to this line that's going around. So this one's absorbed probably a good inch. This one's a little bit under an inch so far. And when I put them in, I could put my hands all the way down and wiggle them back and forth. Now, these books are getting tight. They're not real tight yet, but they've absorbed so much water they're expanding. Books are little sponges sitting on the shelf. So we'll experiment with those as the first part of the hands-on with letting you try some air drying with them, and you can see how some of the different paper reacts compared to what you had here. We're also going to try a little bit of air drying by interleaving into the pages. The challenge is, remember that clay-coated book I mentioned? And I said about the pages sticking together? You'd have to interleave every single page. Well, and that's not real practical. It's also very hard on the binding. This is a classic example of what I would freeze immediately. I would get this into a box, I would get it into freezer storage and stop that damaging effect of the water, and then I would send it to a process called vacuum freeze dry. And this would then come back looking like this book, open up, be fine. And it would be very similar to the same size. Might have a little ripple to it. Might have a little bit of a wave to it, but the pages would separate. I can't deal with this air drying. I just can't. I can't put paper in between every single one of those pages, and then I already showed you how it was starting to dry. This is what they look like when they dry. This is a book that went through a water heater disaster. It was returned to the library. It was out of print. And I thought, well, we can rebind it. You know, it wasn't pretty. We can rebind it. We can put on new end sheets. The pages, you know, were fine and very readable, and we could just stamp that it was water damaged. But then I got to the center, and I got to some of that glossy, clay-coated paper. And these had been allowed to dry, and they have just fused. You know, the pages have just fused together. So the book became a loss, and it became my poor baby example. So anybody who wants to can, actually I'll just pass it around. Resist the temptation, please, to tear the pages apart. That's what makes it an effective example. So we worked our way across on this salvage at a glance. So it talks about the packing. I said you pack them spine down. And then drying method, it does say you can air dry books, you can fan the pages, or you can freeze and have them vacuum freeze dried. And you may go, okay, well, you know, I need more detail than this. This is a really nice little at-a-glance information, but I need more detail. So I think it's your second handout is a page that says Salvage of Water Damage Collections. Doesn't give you much information, but it gives you that URL, again, that I pointed out on the resources list. And it points you to where you can download a 25-page version of Salvage at a Glance, 1 page for each entry. Okay, so a lot more detail. Here's the books, cloth or paper covers. Matches up here, books, cloth or paper covers. So you can download it, and then you can decide what pages you want to keep. I always say keep the whole Salvage at a Glance in case you get some different kinds of materials that you don't normally have and something gets wet. And then keep the more detailed information for the most likely ones that you're going to encounter. So it's just a very easy, download the Word document and then edit it yourself. And then I mentioned the types of drawing. So if you turn over that single sheet, drying techniques for water-damaged books and paper. I mentioned air drying, I mentioned vacuum freeze drying, but air drying, it talks about it along here. And I said that's basically the one that we can do, is air drying. And it warns you, you know, it's speed, it's going to take you a while, but the direct cost is negligible, but it takes a lot of attention to do. You'll see pretty quickly how much space it takes as we start working with the wet materials. And then if you go down the column, you get to vacuum freeze drying. It talks about how that process actually works. It takes about a week or two for the books to go through the drying cycle. This is done by a company. I gave you a handout on one company. Belfour is one of the ones that does this process, and they have a plant in Hayward. They have a plant in Fort Worth, Texas. They have a lot of offices in California and quite a few around the West, and so they can work on that. And the price, you know, when you look at that price compared to trying to acquire and bind and label and everything else, at $5 to $10 a volume, that's pretty darn good for materials that either are no longer available or historically important, research materials, anything like that. And then it says it has good results. It doesn't affect barcodes, it doesn't affect labels, it doesn't affect anything. You can just put the materials right back on the shelf. And then the supplies that go along with doing any kind of emergency response, you have a disaster response supplies and equipment sheet. This first part of the handout where it says in-house source of immediate supplies, I really like to encourage anyone with collections to have a basic little cache of supplies that you can grab right away. Anyone who discovers a leak or something coming over collections or affecting any exhibits, that kind of thing, can grab these materials and can use plastic sheeting, can kind of start a process of rescuing them. So that's that. And then the personal protective supplies, it's usually referred to as PPE. That becomes important if you're going back in after, say, a wildfire and fire damage. You don't want people inhaling a lot of the soot and the things in the air, masks, goggles, gloves. It would also be important going in if there was any contaminants in the water, any sewage, anything from a stream or a creek that had been washed down. And so protecting people, I jump right into protecting collections and salvaging collections, but obviously it's life safety first, it's people first, and so even if they're going into a situation where they're going to have to assess the damage or begin to pull things out, you want them protected. And then there's an alphabetical list of disaster response supplies and equipment. You'll notice across the top, it says immediate response, rinsing, air drying, or freezing for stabilization. It lists the different categories where you might need some of these supplies. That's just to help you. If you're going to be air drying, it would make sense to look at the air dry column and maybe have some supplies on hand, or be thinking, where could I get those? You can get a lot of things at Home Depot. A lot of other, one of my favorites is this Spunbond polyester. It's on here as Spunbond polyester, Rime or Hollytex. I buy this at the fabric store. It's basically interfacing. Anybody sew? Okay, what do you use interfacing for? Yeah. Yeah, so anything in collars or in front plaques often will have it. You can go, and there are many, many, many different weights of interfacing, and you have in front of you some that we will be using. I just buy it by the bolt. The only thing you don't want to do is buy fusible interfacing. That's the kind that you put heat on and it attaches to the fabric. You iron it on, so you don't want fusible. But it's great stuff because you'll see it lets air get under materials as they're drying. It also can be reused over and over and over again. It dries very quickly and then you can reuse it. And as opposed to paper towels or some other paper products that once they get wet, you really just have to throw them away. But that's the kind of, I don't have time today to go more through the supplies. If anybody has any questions about any of them, I would be glad to, help as we go along. It's just meant to be kind of a list to have, and then to say, ooh, we need, we're going to need to do some air drying. What might we need to accomplish that? Or we're going to be putting things into boxes and freeze them, send them off to a freezer. What might we need? That's one of them here as one of the columns as well. Sometimes with photographs, as opposed to that clay-coated paper, when it sticks together, you're done. You can't re-wet it. But sometimes with photographs, sometimes you can put them into a cool water bath with a little bit of what's called photo flow, and that will kind of sometimes help separate them. So that will occasionally help when photographs stick together. But if they sit in water for a long time, a month that's way longer than a long time. I'm talking if they are sitting there for, less than a week or 4 or 5 days, the emulsion begins to separate from the paper. I mean, photographs were born wet to begin with, and so you can use water to an advantage, but if it goes too long or there's stuff in the water, so flood water has got a lot of stuff in it and a lot of particles and other things that work against it, it becomes very, very difficult. And mold is the thing we're trying to, it's our battle. When things are wet, we kind of say our rule of thumb is 48 to 72 hours. You want to get things out. And your kinds of things you're talking about would have to go to a conservator to try to be cleaned, and they might be able to and they might not. They also, if they're framed, I just had a few things framed. I have a few things that are framed here. They'll stick in the frame. So I've got some old photographs. I didn't try to put one of these in each one of your things, but if I were rescuing this from the water, this is the kind of thing I would give priority to, because as soon as this starts to dry, it's going to start to stick to the glass, and it's going to become very difficult to, that's the kind of thing I might tend to get wet again a little bit to try to float it, but I'm not a conservator. If this is really important to me, I would be calling a conservator and asking them what to do. And they may say, keep it damp. Put it in a Ziploc bag, something like that. You'll notice that in some of the directions, if you look at the more complete directions that I mentioned, the full page ones, some of the things it'll say keep damp, microfilm, sometimes the fiche and things, keep them damp and send them for processing. And then you'd be taking it, so you'd be removing it from the frame. You'd be finding a place to work with it. You'd be moving it from the frame, and then you'd be putting it face up. You'll have photographs to deal with. You just won't have any that are in frames. You notice I'm kind of moving things around here? You never take things out of the water until you've prepared the location where you're going to put them. So I'm kind of not doing it exactly right from the beginning. I'm telling you that because you're going to be taking things out of the water. You don't want to have or be pulling things out of a building and walking around trying to figure out what to do with them. That's when more damage gets done. There's also a little book in here, a little leather book, and it actually will dry relatively well, but it's so wet right now, I would just lay it out and let it dry some. Did you notice these two? What are they?
Candy wipes.
Oh, go to the market. I use those just like the spun-bound polyester. And if you can't get it, sometimes you can get these. You can dry and use again. But there are a couple of other photographs in here. Here's one that's beginning to separate from the board. I'm going to show you, but I wouldn't start playing with it. It's beginning to separate, and I'd be real careful that mold didn't start growing underneath that. That would be a potential. Okay, you want to dive in? Let's just quickly do the books. I'd say with the numbers we have here, there's probably enough. We have 2 tubs of books, and why don't you, just like half of you, come around on the other, some of you come into the middle. Kind of prepare the area. I've got paper towels, and I've got different levels of remay and stuff that you can use. Use the paper towels probably for the books, and save the other stuff for the flat paper. So we'll just spend 5 minutes or so on the books, and then we'll go to the flat paper. And see if some of them you can actually stand up, if they're really wet, you may just want to, here you go, just start pulling them out. Yep. You may want to even lay them down flat. I just want you to kind of get a feel for them. And if we'd left these another hour and a half, probably these would have become very, very tight. Now that one may open up. And so put the wet side up. There you go, and just kind of fan it open at the bottom. Because that kind of paper, and with a hardcover, yeah, that one will kind of fan open a little bit. And see, this is you're going to have a harder time with. These some of the paperbacks are just really, now see that one fanned right open.
So you want us to go ahead and fan?
I put the wet side up, yeah. So put the wet side up, that'll stand. Put the wet side up. If it were really wet, you'd probably put it for a while with the wet side down to drain it out. And then you could put it up. What's happening to your paper towels? Yeah, really darn fast, huh? Anybody have some that they could actually interleave? I think you could interleave some inside there, which the idea is with the interleaving is to kind of draw out some of the moisture.
I would interleave this.
Yeah, but see, you're going to have to peel it apart. That one, I think that one's going to be probably the best one, but go ahead and try some. Because be careful, when it's wet, when the paper's wet, it's very fragile. Oh, I see you doing something I should have mentioned. I referred to these as sponges sitting on the shelves. Well, they're just waiting to get wet. But what you don't want to do is treat them like a sponge. Don't, while the paper is wet, you do not want to press or squeeze. You can let the water drain out, but you don't want to do that because think of what happens with that paper fiber. You're going to break the fibers of the paper. You're going to mush them together. And so you want to be real and it's a horrible temptation to want to do that. But while it's wet, you don't want to break the paper fiber. In most cases, you just leave it.
Okay.
In most cases, you just leave it. These are these are really wet, but you might leave it that way for a little while, and then you'll find that kind of paper will dry pretty well. This is going to, some of these you'll see that are just like blocks. What I hope to get across to you is the fact, and you asked the question about if you can't do the vacuum freeze drying, a lot of these would be a loss. You try to air dry these, by the time they have actually lost that water content, they are going to have expanded dramatically. They're going to be very rippled. You can press them some after they're dry, but in fact, it's very tough to air dry some of these. Some of the, we're seeing some that are coming apart quite well, but others you're finding you're kind of having to force. And yeah, see, and those did well, but just like I showed you the paper earlier, some of them just really absorb it, and some do not. But what I hope to do is just get you thinking about the kinds of materials you have, and this would work, or I better go back and find out if things did get wet. Could we do the freezing? Could we get the vacuum freeze drying? And this is not rocket science. If you have to convince anybody, just go get some old discards and get them wet and let them see for themselves what happens when they try to dry them. Okay, and some of these will take days to dry. Down that spine, being very wet, some of these that are just extremely wet are going to take days to dry. Question? Yeah.
Is it better if it dries kind of more slowly and evenly? And what could I do to slow that rate down? Or is it you want it to dry as quickly as you possibly can?
You don't want to do air drying outside. Often when I give workshops, we do it outside, and everybody immediately discovers why you don't want to do it outside, because things start flying as they start drying, and the winds you can't control. You want it to be in a place where you can control the environment. You want it cool as you can. Don't turn the heat up. Drop the temperature as much as you can. Get as much airflow going. Set up fans, not directly on the materials, but around, so the air, because what you're doing is evaporating the moisture off of the materials and slowly working at it that way. So those are some of the hints. And looking for a space that isn't going to get too damp. Carpeting is a little bit harder because the moisture, the more stuff you have in wet, you're going to start raising the moisture content in the room. Sometimes you can run a dehumidifier or something like that, but mainly it's that airflow. Light, keep the lights on 24 hours because the light, mold doesn't like lights. Mold doesn't like airflow, and so what you want to do is you're kind of racing against that kind of thing.
If this was salt water.
Oh man, it's a whole, yeah, there's salt water, because then you've got to do a lot of rinsing.
That's what I was
and then when there's been coastal flooding, that's been the case. Is
So you
that
do rinse it first.
you'd rinse
before
it,
you-
yeah. You'd rinse most of these things too, because it would be dirty water, in most cases. Okay, so let's pull out the flat paper stuff. I want to show you one technique, and then I want everybody to do it. You have little stacks of Mylar. I call this magic Mylar because it is just amazing what it can be used for. And let me find something here. What you do is when you have stuff wet or even a stack of things that are damp, you can use this as a support. So you take a corner, and I'm going to go after this photograph. Instead of trying to dig around in there to get it up, I line up the corner with the corner of the image. And now I can touch this side because I have the Mylar on the front of it. And then, see, I did exactly what I told you not to do. Put down something here, and then you can put it on, and then you can just roll it right off. Magic. But it's a great that you'll see lots of different kinds of paper, documents, you'll see different kinds of inks, photographs, slides, negatives, a really horrible pink streamer in there. Wait till you get down to that, because this is the warning about if you use ultrabite paper for any streamers. what happens sometimes if these papers get wet, you'll see. In some cases, you may be able to just lift them off, but if you're not able to, use the Mylar. The slides are tricky because you have two different media. You have the film and you have the paper, and they're going to dry differently. So technically, you're going to have to think about taking apart that slide at some point and keeping the information on the slide matched with the negative. This was interesting, isn't it? See, now this was from a scrapbook. You each have one old scrapbook page in, and probably most of them may have the images floating off of them. See, this was all on here, but that glue separated really fast on this old water-soluble glue. The newsprint will be very, very flimsy, and that's where the Mylar can come in handy. And if you get two things at once, that's fine, In this case, you might push down there. Now it'll float a little bit. Go on and take two of them. I would take both of them because they're so thin. I'd get them both out. Did you see this with the scrapbook page?
Yeah.
These just immediately started coming off.
In the folded paper, do you let it dry first, or do you want to unfold it?
You could maybe unfold it a little bit. Again, letting things dry a little bit, it'll have more stability than playing around with it too much when it's totally saturated. But I would start unfolding this. It may have staples in it. It may have, I don't know what else is inside there. And I could have inks that are running, that kind of thing. Yeah, so you may just want, that may be the kind of thing that you want to leave, but that's interesting, isn't it? Because it has staples. And of course, look at the little bit of rust there. I mean, those are going to begin to rust from getting wet as well. So you just have to kind of let it take its time. Any observations?
Yeah, this is going to curl up no matter which way I put it.
So here's a negative that's beginning to curl really quickly, and I see a few photographs beginning to curl. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to do a pack after they've dried a little bit. And it's good, remember, if you're pulling out negatives, don't put them on paper towels or they will, again, stick. So putting them on this is perfect. Let me just show you real quickly. You probably noticed there were some straws sitting on the table. You have a kind of a pack of papers in down towards the bottom of your bucket. Say you have a whole bunch of file folders or manila envelopes or something like that, and they're filled with documents, hopefully not photographs and other things that are sticking together, but you have papers. They are papers. This is a dry chunk, but you can take them in chunks. So say you have a whole stack of wet. Pull back just a little bit, and just so they can watch this. You have a whole stack of wet. What you can do is if you can peel apart, even using the Mylar, to kind of separate them out, you can put some straws in, and this also helps your amount of space that you're using. Put on a chunk, put on some more, and then let them dry for a while. Or folders, those could each be individual folders. Let them dry for a while. You've just saved yourself, you've used 1/3 of the amount of space. And I saw this in archives, I think it was the Delaware State Archives. They had tables filled like this, and I kept looking at the pictures going, what is sticking out of those out of those piles? I finally contacted them, and they said straws, and I thought, brilliant. I mean, use kind of what you can think of that makes sense. So you have a stack of papers down in kind of the bottom. If you get down to that, you can pull that out and try it with the straws. And see, what I will do tonight is I will be keeping all of this polyester stuff, and it will all be drying in my hotel room, and it will all be packed up tomorrow, and it'll all be used again. And you can do that. I mean, that's the thing. Air drying, those kinds of things. But all the paper towels are going to end up in the trash bin. The last thing I want to show you is how to do a pack. I think we have a few things that are beginning to curl. We have some photographs, maybe. We have a negative. This is just plexi that I buy at Home Depot. You know, it comes in all different sizes. But it gives me just a little bit of weight, and that's why I use it. I can put a piece of blotter paper. This is actually watercolor paper, but blotter paper is very expensive. I tend not to use it, and it's hard to reuse. You can dry it, but it's expensive and hard to reuse. So if I put this down, and then I put a piece of one of my polyester, and why don't you bring over some of the negatives? Yeah, can you reach that one and put it on here? We'll just put them on. Anything that's beginning to curl. Anybody have anything that's beginning to curl? A lot of the negatives, huh? I'll tell you, if we were outside, you'd have a lot of the photographs over here because they would have really started curling in that length of time. So then you can take one of the lighter weights. Do you have another one? Sure. Oh, what the heck? Put it on. Yeah.
Hold on. Now I have to, oh, God.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, there we go. One more. Okay, you can take one of the lighter weight ones and put this over, and you'd have to be pretty careful to kind of get things to come down, and it might be more than a one person. I know I'm going off a little bit here on the side, but more than a one person job. And then I might choose to put blotter paper on top of it, or I might just put another piece of the polyester. I could then add more onto here. Matter of fact, since I'm going to keep these, I think I'll just put the boards will start to warp too as they dry. I always have to dry them really flat. Put more on, and then I can put this on top, and with air flowing around, you could keep stacking these up. Air will keep getting in there, and these will flatten out nicely. And once they've started to dry a little bit flattened, they then will stay flat. They don't turn around and start curling back up again. They get enough moisture out of them that then they relax. It's when they're real wet that they start curling up.
What about mold if you dried it this way?
I wouldn't leave it this way a long time. I would have waited until there was a fair amount of moisture out of them, and then I would change this out. I wouldn't do this and walk away from it. And you can add a little bit of weight to the side if you need to, but I find just the plexiglass sheet has enough weight for this kind of thing. You have to be careful with any of this with the mold. Yeah. Air drying is partly labor intensive because you can't just set the stuff up and come back 3 days later. The books need to be flipped back and forth, head to tail. Interleaving might need to come out. Anything like this, you know, you'd want to dry it and move it on to other sheets to dry as it absorbs some of that moisture. My emergency number is on the magnets that are there. We cover the western states, and I will help anybody at the end of that emergency number. We say call right away, and we'll try to help you through making decisions. There's no charge, and we'll just try to help you. You can bounce things off of us, and I've helped Palm Springs Public Library, or Cathedral City out here, had a fire. They had a lot of water damage. They had about 5,000 things that were wet, and I encouraged him. I said, you know, you don't know yet whether or not you want to keep them or not. You haven't really decided. We had talked through what kinds of materials they were. I said a cheap first step would just be to get them frozen. And their insurance was willing to do that. They got them frozen. They took several weeks, and then they made the decision after working with insurance and thinking about different aspects of it, they tossed them. See, so sometimes it just allows you to make that decision. It could be it allows you to make the decision to get the stuff frozen, and then now do we want them cleaned, or do we want them just to come back, or do we want to scan those, you know, do we want to wait and scan those things and get away from the paper, you know, all of that. And the price, but I look at quotes too, and sometimes the quote will be because they're doing so much work on a couple of boxes, and I go back to the place and say, do you really want this much work done? You can get this done for a lot cheaper if you're willing to, you know, do some of the other work to it. And so that's where insurance plays in, but it's also, you know, what you're willing to take on yourself. And that depends on the number of people you have, the time of year, These things are never convenient. They happen right before holidays. They happen on Friday nights. And, I mean, it's never convenient. That's the one rule. I'm going to be on a panel with Susan, as I mentioned, on Thursday. And if any of you are interested, I'm going to talk more about some of the workshops, the disaster workshops we have going on in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, the whole kind of western area. Any other questions? And I'll be here until Thursday, so feel free to stop me and ask me if there's anything.